Okay, so we're going to talk about the bad guys out there today a little bit. And Sun Tzu was not Korean, he was Chinese, right? He was a Chinese general that lived many centuries ago that wrote a book called The Art of War. And it had some axioms in there in terms of principles. And one of those principles was, if you know yourself but not the enemy, you're doomed to win or lose as many battles as you win. And I think that's very apropos for where we are in healthcare today. We're winning and losing them at the same time. And we're losing as many as we're winning right now. And unfortunately, I think we may end up losing more than we win if things don't start changing a bit. So one of his other axioms, if you know yourself as well as you know your enemy, then you need not fear 100 battles. So in other words, if you do that risk assessment, if you shore up your lines, if you find where your vulnerabilities are, if you do something about those things, then you have a much better chance of keeping the bad guys out. When we talk about cybercrime today, what does a cyber criminal look like? Everybody in this room looks like a cyber criminal, right? And that's really true. It's people that are highly educated. It's people that are professional. It's people that are out of work. It's blue collar. It's white collar. It's female. It's male. It's young. It's old. It's anybody is really what it is anymore. The interesting thing about this, and if you've heard me speak in the past, one of the things that you know about me is that I don't bring other industry information into my briefings. I only talk about things that happen in healthcare. Because one of the things that I believe in is that if you're going to talk to leadership in healthcare about threat and about security, you ought to be talking about healthcare. You ought to be using healthcare examples. And unfortunately or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, we have lots of examples to use. So we really don't have to look elsewhere. But when you look at this list of people and where they're from, the countries that they're from, the professions that they're in, the ages that they are, and you realize that every one of those people was involved in some cyber crime involving a healthcare organization, you have to look at it and say, why in the world were they coming after healthcare? And it's real simple, because we have a lot of information, and that information is valuable. This is just some of the breaches that have happened and been reported in the last few months. And if you look at this list, the thing that you should notice on this list is that these are all very different scenarios. Some of these are cases of high-end hacks. Some of these are cases of poor management or administration of networks. Some of these are examples of successful phishing attacks against individuals. Some of these are users making mistakes. Right? Some of these are people, bad people in our organization doing bad things. The problem is, or the point is that we have just about everything you can think of going on in healthcare today. We really do. And when you look at some of these things and you start talking about the impact of them, I'll give you an example. The one there that says 400 hospital billings delayed as a clearinghouse was hit with ransomware. I travel a lot around the country giving presentations, and I was actually flying back to home right before the holidays. And I was at 37,000 feet, and I was connected on American Airlines, right? So I was working, talking to my partner, and I get this email from a CIO in Florida that we do business with, and she says, my brother's going to call you tomorrow. He's in trouble. So I assume that means something's going on with security. So I write her back, and I said, okay, can you give me a little bit of background on what's going on? She writes back, she says, I don't know what it is, but he's all excited. He says something to do with his network, and he needs security help. I said, okay. So the next day, I get to my office, and he calls me, and he's all excited. And the first thing I had to do was get him calmed down so I could understand what he was trying to tell me. This individual was the CTO for this organization that does billing work for 400 hospitals up and down the eastern seaboard. The young lady who gets the bills ready or the batch ready to be sent out through the system walked into his office the day before that was supposed to go out. The bills were supposed to go out. And she said, can somebody give me the encryption key so I can unencrypt the data? And he said, what are you talking about? That data's not encrypted. And she said, oh, but it is. Literally minutes before she had gone on there, the hackers had hit that network and had encrypted the entire thing. Not just the data in that database, but everything on the network. So even the CIO couldn't get in. So I said, okay, well then let's do this. Let's triage the victim first. Let's take care of the hospitals. Let's go out there and buy some systems. I know you don't want to do that, but let's go buy some systems and let's take your backups and let's get the bills out. And then we'll fix the problem. And there was silence. You think he had backups? Nothing was backed up. Nothing. So all the information that the hospitals had sent them was not backed up either, and now it was all encrypted. And they were literally, this was the day the bills were supposed to go out. So they absolutely missed that billing cycle for all those hospitals that day. We were actually lucky enough, in this case, because of the ransomware that was used, to go in and resurrect the data from the disks from shadow files. Now, it was ugly, and it took their IT department the better part of 2 weeks to put it all back together again so that they could use it. And they missed a second billing cycle. That organization today has lost more than 40% of their customers. They did not have a firewall in front of that network. They did not have any security. They did not have anybody appointed to security. They had never done a security assessment, let alone a risk assessment. They didn't have any policies or procedures around security because they were a billing company. And not one of those 400 hospitals had ever asked them about their security. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a big mistake. You've got to start asking your vendors about their security. And I'll give you another example. Yesterday, I sat in a very, very large health system that admitted they don't have a firewall in front of their network. Think about that for a second. In 2015, there is a health system out there, a very large one, that doesn't have a firewall between them and the public. It's unimaginable, right? But it still happens. All of these things happen. And new ones are coming out all the time. New vulnerabilities are being found as fast as we're developing new systems. What I thought was comical about this scenario was every year up until this past year, there had been health systems that had actually been demonstrated in terms of the hacks at Black Hat and DEF CON. This year, for the first year, there was not a health system hack, if you will. There wasn't a pump or a respirator or some other device, if you will, that was demonstrated. And the news media went wild after Black Hat was over and printed all these articles that said, healthcare is no longer the target of hackers. I'm like, I'm like, what just happened here, right? And I wrote one that said, guys, everything that they demonstrated at Black Hat this year is being used in a hospital somewhere in America, right? We have people wearing Google glasses walking into hospitals. So the 12 hacks that are associated with Google glasses absolutely ought to be on somebody's mind. We have organizations that are virtualizing their desktops so that they don't have to encrypt them, only to find out now that the bad guys can scrape the screen from a VDI from outside the hospital. They don't even have to be near you to do it, right? None of this stuff, we are not, people seem to think, and for whatever reason, they seem to equate healthcare to medical devices as it relates to IT and the threat. Now, I will tell you that medical devices is a big issue, and it's one of my pet peeves, but that's not all we've got. We've got everything that everybody else has. And so when those things are vulnerable, we're vulnerable. I actually like the free botnet for malware. Anybody? I don't know if anybody go to Black Hat this year? You did? Did you see that demonstration? You did? Oh, this is cool. There are two little kids. I say little kids, they were young teenagers. What they did was they went out. And you know how you can go out to the internet and get free cloud space? These kids went out and got a boatload of free cloud space. Then they linked it together with a software program that they wrote that spewed malware from all of these cloud storage facilities out into the internet. They created a huge bot for malware using free internet service and free cloud services from legitimate cloud vendors. Think about that for a second. And as I said, the reason we're doing all this and we're seeing all this is because we've got information that's of value. The RAND Corporation printed a study last summer that came out. It was called The Hacker's Bazaar. And if you haven't read anything or heard anything about the black market and how that operates, it's a great read because it's very current. And it was an 18-month study that they did in the dark net. Basically, the hackers are getting smarter. They're now doing things to make sure that the feds, it's even harder for the feds to catch them when they're doing stuff that they're doing. They're actually vetting the people that are asking them to do things or asking to buy information from them so that they have some assurance that who they're dealing with is not a fed. They're helping the bad guys stay ahead of the good guys because they're selling the hacks on the black market. They're selling the services on the black market. You want to hire a hacker, you can go to the black market and you can hire one, just like any other consultant that you might want to hire. Okay? Exploitation of social networks and mobile devices is making it even harder. A lot of the legitimate sites that you go to today are infected with malware, and you have no idea. And you go there and you become infected. Or you get hit with a water cooler attack or some other attack that's out there in those social networking. Right? That's why it's becoming such a problem. Add to that our new reliance on IT. And all of you have been in IT or healthcare and IT for a while, so I'm assuming that you've lived through the last decade and you've watched us grow from organizations where, for the most part, our data was kept inside. We didn't have a lot of external connectivity. We didn't have network devices. We sure as hell didn't have all the mobile devices that we have today or all the platforms that we have today. And we didn't have all the programs with respect to data sharing that we have today. But when you start marching from 2005 through 2009 to 2012 to where we are today in 2015, we are connected to just about everybody. And 98% of our processes are automated, and 95% of our patient information is digitized, and we are absolutely reliant on our IT systems for our efficiency and for our ability to deliver care. And so outages do make a difference. In fact, this past December, I watched a CIO get fired for having their 4th outage in 2 months. Right? All because of network issues. And it's not going to get any better. Right? So, where are our problems at? Who's our biggest problem in healthcare today? Who? People. Employees. Right? Employees are still our biggest challenge. They're our biggest nightmare because they make mistakes. They do things without thinking. Sometimes they do things in a hurry. Sometimes they do things because they're tired. I mean, you look at the phishing exercises that, as an example, that are run in healthcare today. The average hit rates on those things is anywhere from 40 to 60%. And that's something, by the way, that we all ought to try to learn to avoid, even as individuals, not just as employees of the hospital, right? But we've seen increases in this kind of activity over and over again, year after year, right? And in studies last year, 51% of the respondents said that's our biggest concern. Their biggest concern is employees. And what's worse is we don't think the training we're giving them is working, which means we really have some issues out there. What's even worse than that is that we really don't have a lot of proactive monitoring going on with respect to what users are doing in the environment. Even though we have a lot of people who've actually, or system organizations who've actually invested in privacy monitoring technology, if you look at the results from the OCR's pilot year in their audits, and you look at the results of, say, the audits that my company does around the country each year, less than 20% of those organizations are using more than 10% of the capability of those tools. What happens in most cases is that whatever they were monitoring before they got the tool is what they're monitoring after they got the tool. They just automated those checks, as opposed to using the full capability of those systems. And what's worse, none of those systems, for the most part, help us with fraud or identity theft. Because typically where we catch that is when we're watching behavior. Not legitimate access, but behavior. Because the people that are doing it have legitimate access, right? They are allowed to look at the information. But what's interesting when you look at the folks that get caught, that participate in fraud or identity theft, they have a very different behavioral pattern than folks who just come to work and do their job. Folks that come to work and do their job see, if they're, for instance, somebody who works in administration, maybe looks at 60 records in a day. The person that's involved in identity theft or fraud oftentimes will be looking at 2 to 3 times that much. But because there's nothing in the system that sets off an alarm, if all they're doing is looking, if you're not watching, you're not going to catch them. That's simple. We talked about that supply chain a minute ago with that example I gave of that billing company. I really can't stress this enough. We have probably, business associates is probably the fastest growing sector of our business as a company. But one of the things that we do right now, whenever a new business associate comes to us for security services, we ask them, how did you find us and why did you come to us? 95% of them say the same thing. Our covered entity sent us. They're not coming on their own yet. They're not coming voluntarily. They're coming when a business associate tells them they need to go do it, or when there's a contract hanging in the balance. Oftentimes when we ask them why, they say, well, we went through this process with them, we were trying to sign a contract, and they said our security wasn't where it needed to be, and we needed to do something about it. The bottom line for everybody in this room, if you're a covered entity, is that you really need to take a look at your business associates, at your vendors. Minimally, at least send them a security questionnaire and make them fill it out. If they can't fill that out, you probably need to have a discussion with them. And I can tell you that there have been a lot that have not been able to fill that out. Okay? But we do need to do a better job of paying attention to that. Those medical devices, which I talked about earlier, was a pet peeve, and Lee talked about it a little. My biggest problem with the medical device security issue is that it's been 9 years and we still don't have a solution. And everybody in the industry knows what the problem is. Manufacturers are developing and delivering insecure products to the consumer. And the consumer, in most cases, the health system, doesn't have a good choice. They can't even use market pressure to get them to do a better job. Because there may be 6 pumps out there that they can choose from, and not one of them is secure. So it doesn't matter. They have to pick the best of the worst, as opposed to the best. That's really where we are. And the federal government, and that study came out yesterday, right, Kim? From FTC. There was a meeting this past fall where all of the, quote, regulatory agencies met and industry folks met and had a discussion around this. And it's a great articulation, once again, of what the problem is, but it does what it always has done. It stops short of providing a solution. So we're going to continue to have consumers who have to buy things that aren't secure, and we're going to continue to have health systems that are going to deploy hundreds of pumps and other types of devices into their networks that aren't secure, and they're going to have to find creative ways to protect the rest of the network from those devices, when that's really not the way it should be. Everybody knows the story of Dick Cheney, right? Just a trivia question. When were medical devices networked for the first time? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't as far back as you think. Somebody? What? No, that's too soon. You're close. 2006 was when the first medical device was networked. I was flabbergasted when I saw that because I figured it was way before that. We've had medical devices since the 70s, right? But they actually didn't connect them to the network where they fed information to the network until 2006. What did they do in 2007 to make it even more interesting?
Wireless, probably.
Wi-Fi, right? Wireless. They made them wireless so they could communicate through the wireless network. Well, Mr. Cheney had his heart attack at the end of 2006, and they had to put an ICD in his chest. The Secret Service had them disconnect the wireless communication capability in that ICD because they knew it could be compromised. And so they had to have a medical team that followed him around everywhere while he was in office to make sure that they could every once in a while stop and put a device up to his chest and recalibrate his ICD and download the information and send it back to Bethesda so the doctors could review it. Think of the money that cost the taxpayers. Then Homeland came along and they actually killed the vice president in 2012 in one of their episodes, and they did it identically to Mr. Cheney's issue. Malware, we talked about malware. In 2006, we saw 200,000 malware introduced into the internet. In 2014, we saw 100 million malware introduced into the internet. Now, what was different? Well, the difference was in 2006, we still had people writing those things. We had human beings producing those things. In 2014, we have botnets that are doing it. We have machines that are writing these viruses and putting them out. New variants over and over again, right? So there's much higher multiplication of these things. What has that done to us as an industry and every other industry? Well, the antivirus providers who have to give us what? Signatures to be able to recognize the malware when it's coming at us, right? Can't keep up. So today, antivirus solutions only see about 46% of the malware that's out there. So if you're relying on antivirus alone, you just lost the battle. You better have a more sophisticated security architecture than that. But more importantly than that, we've also had things like the shrinkage of the refresh cycle, if you will, in terms of operating systems and products, right? Used to, we thought we'd keep workstations around, operating systems around for 3 to 5 years. Now those operating systems are changing every 18 months. And what does that do to our budget as an organization and in our refresh cycle and everything else? It compacts it even more and it makes it cost more for us to keep up. We still have organizations out there with XP in 2003 in their environment. We actually even have folks out there with Windows NT, and if you have that, don't raise your hand. You don't need to tell anybody. But we have it. All of that makes it even harder to avoid some of those issues out there. When you look at the community health system breach, right? You had a Juniper router that failed to get fixed for Heartbleed. And it was the old axiom of the bad guys only have to get it right once. We have to get it right every time. And if you're community health, if you're familiar with community health, you know that that's a very large health system with literally tens of thousands of network devices, right? So the actual thought of missing one is not that hard to understand or hard to believe. But unfortunately, because the bad guys can sit out there and set up their scanners to run all night and just scan indiscriminately, like I said, all they have to find is the one that we forgot or the one that we missed. And then they have something to go after. And that's exactly what they did. The problem though with that scenario was it wasn't just that they found a vulnerability on the perimeter to get in, but once they got in, they found out that it was kind of easy to navigate the network, and it was just as easy to get the data out. Because one of the things that we're not doing a very good job of as well is stopping the hackers when in the exploitation phase or in the exfiltration phase. And here's the thing, you are never going to stop all the bad guys all the time. They're going to find a way in. There are going to be zero-day attacks when they run out of all the other options. There are ways that they're going to get in, regardless of what we do, how much we spend, how hard we work, how diligent we are. But the one thing we can do is we can make it really difficult for them once they get in. If we actually do a good job of hardening the network devices in our network so that I have to work to break every switch and every router to get to a server, guess what? Most of those hackers, just like drive-by thieves, are going to go somewhere else because it's too hard to get there. But even more importantly than that, they're going to make noise while they're doing that, and I have a better chance of catching them. But even if I don't catch them and they actually do get to that server that's got the data on it, if I have rules in place and technologies in place like data loss prevention that help me stop the data from getting out, I can stop the exfiltration and I can avoid the major breach. Healthcare needs to recognize that it's going to get hacked, it's going to get compromised, and they need to focus on stopping the exploitation and the exfiltration phases. Mobile devices. How many people heard the story of the doctor in Detroit that was robbed at gunpoint, had his laptop and his phone taken from him, and then threatened with his life if he didn't turn over the passwords? Okay? Does encryption work when I have your password? This is why I always call encryption a dumb solution. Because it doesn't think, it doesn't ask questions, it doesn't worry about appropriateness. Was it appropriate for 18,000 medical records to be on that laptop? Was it appropriate for 4.2 million records to be on those desktops? I mean, when you ask these questions and you think about it for a second, you go, no, it really wasn't. And if it hadn't have been there, he could have turned over the laptop, turned over the phone, turned over the passwords, and told them how to use it, and it wouldn't have been a problem. Right? But it was, and the organization ended up with a breach report in a armed robbery. Think about that for a second. You want to talk about feeling like it's unfair. It probably felt that way. But the fact of the matter was, at the end of the day, if you're the consumer, your data was breached. It's that simple, right? We need to think about whether we're going to put data on these devices. We need to think about whether it's smarter to have the information in the data center and have it presented to the device when the person needs it and not live on that device. But if we're going to let it go on that device, then we better manage those devices appropriately. We need to use mobile device management solutions. We need to use encryption. We need to create those containers, those encrypted containers. We need to have the ability to wipe those things. And oh, by the way, that's just the price of doing business and letting personal devices connect to your network. Just that simple. Every year, we have billions of dollars of fraud and identity theft in this country. Last year in particular, we had one scenario at this time last year, as a matter of fact, at tax time, where 2,200 doctors were targeted in a single tax fraud scheme, where fraudulent tax form claims were filed for all of them within a day of each other, right? Now, how do you get a hold of 2,200 doctors' information and file all those claims in a single day, right? It doesn't happen by accident. It wasn't coincidental. There weren't 22 different cells in 22 states that did it, right? There was somebody who got access to some database somewhere that had personal information about those physicians that allowed them to create those forms and electronically file them. And oh, by the way, they didn't pay them. And all of those physicians, unfortunately, then had to go through the next 9 to 12 months to get their refund eventually, as a victim of tax fraud. It happens all the time. And we have folks working for us who are recognized out there as being high-value targets. Physicians are recognized as high-value targets. They make good money. Executives are high-value targets. They typically make good money. When you look at a lot of the hacks that are targeted at individuals, the spear phishing, etc., it's at those individuals. And there's another reason for that. People who make a lot of money tend not to watch their pay stub. So they don't even know it's happening to them until somebody goes to put it back in their account because they discovered it, which is what happened at 6 different academic medical centers last year with high-paid individuals. And this one here I call dumber than dirt, right? We've got to quit doing this. I mean, you can put, I don't know how many statistics you can throw up there that says we are going to lose mobile devices. We are going to have mobile devices stolen. They are highly pilferable items, and they sell really nicely in the back streets, right? So if we're going to let the data go on them, as I said, encrypt them. Or just don't let the data be there in the first place so that the CFO can actually write it off as part of shrinkage, right? So that I don't have a breach that I have to deal with. But the bottom line is, they're going to happen. Targeted attacks. These are probably the ones that are the most dangerous and the ones that cause the most concern for me and for us last year as an industry. These are the ones like community health system. These are the ones like a hospital up in New England that was actually the victim of first phishing and then a malware that had a malicious payload that tried to steal data. These things are out there. They are more and more targeting healthcare because they know all of our information is now in the system. And they're not just targeting us. They're not just targeting the hospital directly. They're targeting that supply chain that I talked about as well, because they know our data is out there too. Let's face it, folks, what would you rather hit? The single hospital or the vendor that's doing business for 400 hospitals that has all of their data? Right? The mother lode is over there. Right? The problem is, though, is that they actually tend to go where there's not that good a security. And right now, for whatever reason, we all know, they consider healthcare an easy target. And unfortunately, we have other folks in the federal government that are helping them believe that, like the FBI, who's putting out pins telling everybody that healthcare is an easy target. The question is, we need to quit being answer is we need to quit being an easy target and take back the advantage. Compliance is also not getting easier for any of us. And in 2015, we're supposed to see the dreaded permanent audits from OCR, right? If they ever get it all together. I do believe we'll see it sometime this year. They have at least had improvements in automating their reporting and handling of complaints. And as a result, we've seen a doubling of the number of complaints in the last 2 years that they're handling, right? The meaningful use audits with Mr. Figliozzi, and if you have, how many folks have had a Figliozzi audit? Have you had the comprehensive or the desk audit? Desk audit, who's had a comprehensive? No one? Well, if you haven't had a comprehensive yet, it's a treat. Because they actually know what they're doing. They're really, really good. They'll send 3 or 4 people on site. They'll know your EHR backwards and forwards. They'll know where you should have pulled the data from to get your denominators and do your calculations. And they will do the calculations themselves to see if what they come up with looks like what you came up with. And as long as we're in the same ballpark, we're okay. If we're in a different ballpark, then we've got some explaining to do, right? Meaningful use now has a desk audit, a comprehensive audit, and the comprehensive audit can come in 1 or 2 flavors. It's either after the fact or it's prepayment, right? The OIG last December decided to get in the game on meaningful use, and they created a new audit. And this is a technical security audit of the EHR environment. And in this particular audit, what they do is they send technical reps on site, and they conduct tests of your EHR platform, the databases associated with your EHR, any portal that you have associated or web interfaces that you have associated with your EHR, and they actually conduct the technical scanning and collect the data and look at how well those systems are configured, how well they're patched, and what versions they're on, etc. Something that a lot of folks really hadn't counted on. And in fact, I know in a lot of hospitals, we have folks who will say the EHR doesn't get scanned. Well, that's about to change. You can either scan it or they'll scan it for you if they come to see you. Lee talked about the FTC. You know, one of the things that the FTC did put in the report that they released yesterday as a final note was that they do intend, and they reiterated, they do intend to continue to come after healthcare for privacy and security violations. One of the other things that they said in their letter was that they tend to look for things that you post publicly and that end up being false statements, right? Because they look at those as public contracts with the consumer. But the other thing they looked at, they're gonna start looking at, is what you do with data that you collect from the patient. Meaning, do you do something with the data other than what was intended, or what the patient or the consumer had an expectation that you were going to do? And this is not just health systems, this is also things like wearable technologies, right? So if a vendor has a wearable technology out there that I wear that monitors my steps, because I want to see how many steps I'm taking each day, but you're also keeping track of that information and then aggregating it, doing research with it, and selling it to somebody else. I never told you you could do that when I bought that wearable device. And unless your privacy statement that you gave me when I bought that wearable device from you basically tells me that you're going to do that and gets my permission to do it, you've basically violated my rights as a consumer. So that's something else that people need to keep in mind that they're going to be looking at. That's one reason why a couple of years ago they went after Accretive. Even though the state attorney general went after Accretive, even though OCR decided not to go after Accretive, the FTC did go after Accretive because Accretive said the consumer never gave them permission to do what they were doing with that data. The other thing we have is the states continue to create new laws. Now, of course, you live in literally the most, I think, litigious state in the union, or pretty darn close to it. You also have, right now at least, the most active state attorney general in terms of going after healthcare organizations. And we have, I know from experience because we have some clients in the state that are fairly large, and I think that the state attorney general has an office space in their hospital. Because I swear to God, they can't even blink without her or somebody in her staff showing up and wanting to know what went on, right? I mean, it's amazing. And yet we have other states in the union where we don't even have a breach law. And worse yet, all of this stuff is costing us valuable resources. valuable resources. The cost of security in and of itself is a cost. It's always going to be. That's the way it is. But it's even worse when I have negative cost associated with security as well, in terms of fines and breaches and incidents and outages and legal fees, et cetera, et cetera. There's one health system in this state that I can't name, obviously, but they're spending more than $500,000 a month in legal fees for breaches that they had 3 years ago. It's amazing, right? And it's just every year. It goes on. It goes on. And it's a drain. It's a serious drain, right? We also see now that they're putting security in just about everything that the government measures. So your Medicare, Medicaid folks, right, when they leave, they get that survey that they take, and based on your scores in terms of how well they think you did, your reimbursement is affected. One of the factors that they rank you on now is privacy and security. And it's happening more and more. Just about every audit, every review, every measure that the federal government has that involves a patient or information or systems, they're putting privacy and security requirements in there. It is costing us money to not do it right, is what it amounts to. And we really need to turn that around. So, with that, do I need to answer your question, Ms. Kim? Anybody want me to answer the framework question? Okay, so the short answer is pick one. Okay? And as Lee said, the rule doesn't dictate any particular framework. An OCR in the government is never going to tell you, at least for the moment, that you have to use a particular framework. Now, I think that we are very close to being on the verge of that changing, because with Senate Bill 1353, which basically says that the NIST standards are literally the standard for the government now, that means that that's the yardstick that the government is going to use, right? And it is the framework that I recommend to everybody, and there's a reason for that. And it's because NIST sits there day in and day out and researches the things that we need to do to protect our environment, right? And they have a set of standards for the cloud, and they have a set of standards for mobile devices, and they have a set of standards for third-party vendors, and they have a set of standards for you and your network, right? It's one stop. You get everything you need in terms of a standard. You can go with ISO, you can go with HITRUST, you can go with IDLE, you can go with whatever framework you want, but you need to have one. And the reason you need to have one is because you need the discipline that it provides. It's like anything else. When we have discipline in what we do a better job at it. When we have a roadmap for what we need to consider, we tend to consider it, right? If we have a roadmap that tells us we need to measure certain things and we actually measure those things, they actually get done. You show me something that doesn't get measured, and I'll show you something that doesn't get done. That's just the way it is, okay? So frameworks are important, regardless of which one you choose. If you're asking me which one I would choose, the ones I recommend to our hospitals, it's the NIST framework. Because the one thing I want, anytime a government regulator walks into one of those hospitals, whether it's for a complaint, whether it's for a breach investigation, whether it's for an audit, I want them to look at something that they're going to use to measure me by. And just experience, it works. Okay? And it works with all those others. So that's my 2 cents worth.